Hi, and welcome to Guilty Secrets Reddit. Let me get straight to the point. My husband actually laughed, while signing our divorce papers. That smug little smirk of his, like he'd just won some grand game. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, legs crossed, nails perfectly done, letting him believe whatever fantasy he had spinning in his head. He thought I was walking away empty-handed. He thought that all the late nights I spent working were just me distracting myself from our crumbling marriage. He thought my silence meant defeat. Poor man. He had no idea. The room was quiet except for the scratch of the pen. Then the judge cleared his throat and began reading my disclosed net worth, every investment, every asset, every quiet little empire I'd built while he was too busy entertaining himself elsewhere. I watched the color drain from my husband's face like someone had flipped a switch. By the time the number rolled off the judge's tongue, his smirk was gone. He looked hollow. And that was the moment I realized something delicious. He never truly knew who he was married to. You see, my husband always assumed I was just comfortable living off his income. That was his favorite narrative. He was the provider, the big shot, the man who took care of me. In reality, I was running circles around him in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. While he was bragging at golf clubs about his deals, I was quietly building a portfolio that made his earnings look like pocket change. Not flashy investments. Not risky ventures, no. I prefer subtlety. Commercial properties under shell companies, small but powerful shares in tech startups, private lending with interest rates that would make banks jealous. Every time he handed me his credit card, thinking I'd go on some wild shopping spree, I'd swipe it for just enough to keep up the image, then funnel my actual money into another asset. I wasn't hoarding. I was multiplying. And because I'm not stupid, I kept it all separate, legally airtight, hidden in plain sight. The best part? He helped me without even realizing it. He introduced me to people he thought would inspire me socially, but I turned those introductions into lucrative partnerships. He bragged about me being just his wife, which made everyone underestimate me. And underestimation is the sharpest weapon a woman like me can wield. So while he thought he was outsmarting me with his late-night business trips and conveniently deleted texts, I was playing an entirely different game, a bigger one. By the time the divorce came, my wealth was something he couldn't touch, couldn't claim, and couldn't even fully comprehend. And the moment he heard that number in court, oh, that was worth more than every dollar I'd ever made. The moment I discovered his cheating was almost laughably cliché. It wasn't some dramatic lipstick on the collar situation or a stranger's message spilling the truth. It was his own arrogance that betrayed him. He left his tablet unlocked on the kitchen counter one morning, screen glowing with a thread of messages so saccharine and juvenile they would have embarrassed a teenager. I didn't scroll far. I didn't need to. The words, "Last night was amazing, can't wait for next time," burned themselves into my mind. It wasn't even the betrayal that hit me hardest. It was the insult to my intelligence. The banality of it. After everything I'd built for us, for him, this was his grand rebellion? A tawdry little affair with someone who probably thought an expensive dinner was the pinnacle of romance? I didn't confront him. Confrontation is for people who need closure. I don't need closure, I need leverage. And leverage requires patience. From that day on, every smile I gave him, every casual, "How was your day, darling?" was deliberate. I was studying him, cataloging his patterns, noticing when he disappeared, who he mentioned in passing, even how he spent money. I didn't need to expose him publicly. I wanted him to think I was oblivious, to keep making mistakes while I fortified my position. The beauty of my silence was that it made him careless. He grew bolder, thinking he was untouchable, and in that arrogance, he revealed more than he should have. I learned her name. I learned where she worked. I even learned that some of the business trips he claimed were essential were actually thinly veiled vacations with her. I kept every scrap of evidence locked away, not because I intended to humiliate him, but because I wanted the option. Options are power, and I never let go of power. By the time the divorce came into motion, I had already positioned myself as the picture of composure, the dignified spouse who just couldn't make it work anymore. And he bought it completely. Little did he know, every step he took toward what he thought was freedom was actually leading him straight into the one moment he'd never forget. Hearing my net worth read aloud in that courtroom. The morning of the court hearing felt almost cinematic. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted the luxury of time. Everything about that day had to be flawless, not just my legal case, but my presence. A power suit in a shade of deep emerald that caught the light just right. Understated diamond studs. Hair sleek and precise. I didn't want to look like a woman scorned. I wanted to look like a woman in control of every possible outcome. When I arrived at the courthouse, he was already there, leaning casually against the wall outside the courtroom, chatting with his lawyer like this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He saw me, gave me that smug little half-smile, and I could practically hear the internal monologue in his head. She's not going to walk away with much. I've kept everything tied up. I've got this in the bag. We sat on opposite sides of the room, the air between us thick with unspoken things. His side of the table was stacked with papers, financial statements, and proof that he was the primary earner. My side? A neat, slim folder containing everything that actually mattered. He thought my lack of visible ammunition was a weakness. He didn't understand that my arsenal wasn't in paper, it was in execution. The judge was a calm, almost indifferent figure as proceedings began. His lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a generous man providing for his wife while she lived a life of leisure. I almost laughed out loud. But I didn't. I waited. Timing is everything. Then my attorney stood, voice steady but sharp, laying out the reality of my financial independence, complete with asset documentation that had been scrubbed, verified, and made utterly untouchable. And then, the number, my disclosed net worth, read aloud in a voice that echoed in the silent room. I kept my eyes fixed on him as it sank in, watching the shift, the slight widening of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, the microscopic flicker of panic in his expression. His lawyer glanced at him, clearly not prepared for this revelation. He didn't look at me again for the rest of the session. Not once. That smugness he wore like a shield was gone, stripped bare in front of a judge, his lawyer, and, most satisfyingly, himself. And I sat there, legs crossed, back straight, every inch of me radiating the one truth he'd never wanted to face. He had underestimated me, and it had cost him dearly. When the hearing adjourned, I gathered my folder, slowly, deliberately, letting him leave first. It wasn't hesitation, it was choreography. I wanted him to stew in those few minutes outside, to feel the weight of what he'd just heard before I appeared. When I finally stepped out into the crisp air, he was leaning against the stone wall of the courthouse, not smug anymore, but rigid, jaw clenched. He looked like someone who'd just realized the map he'd been following led him straight into a trap. His eyes flicked to me, and for a split second, I saw something that almost looked like fear. Then he masked it with a tight, forced smile. "Well," he said, voice a shade too casual. Guess you've been busier than I thought. I walked up to him, heels clicking against the pavement, and stopped just close enough for my perfume to reach him. That's the thing about thinking you know someone, I said softly. Sometimes, you only know the version they allow you to see. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words landed sharper than anything I could have shouted. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an insult, but I turned away before he could speak. It wasn't about giving him the last word. It was about showing him that his words no longer had any relevance to my life. My driver was waiting, door open, the black sedan gleaming in the sunlight. I slid inside without looking back. As we pulled away, I caught his reflection in the tinted glass. Standing there, watching, alone. That image lodged itself in my mind, not as a victory, but as a reminder. People like him never imagine the possibility that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding all the power. He thought the divorce would strip me of status, of security, of control. Instead, it exposed him for what he truly was, small, unprepared, and dangerously complacent. But I wasn't done yet. The court settlement was only the public part of the story. What he didn't know was that I still had one more move planned, something far subtler, far more permanent. Because in my world, winning isn't enough. You have to make sure they never forget that you won. The beauty of a well-executed plan is that it doesn't just end with the obvious. When it lingers, weaving itself quietly into the fabric of the other person's life until they can't separate their misfortune from your absence. My final move began long before the divorce papers were signed, before the first crack appeared in our marriage. It started the moment I realized he was a man who thrived on connections, on being the center of a web of influence. He wasn't particularly talented, nor was he innovative. His strength was in who he knew. He built his career on handshakes, golf games, and whispered agreements over expensive scotch. And that, I realized, was where I could dismantle him without ever touching him directly. Over the years, while he flaunted his network in front of me like some kind of trophy, I was building my own, quietly, strategically, but with far stronger foundations. I didn't just meet people, I studied them. I learned what they valued, what they feared, and, most importantly, what they needed that my husband couldn't give them. I invested not just money, but loyalty, solutions, and discretion. People remembered that. And when the time came, I didn't need to ask anyone to cut him off. All I had to do was make myself the more valuable connection. The rest happened naturally. In the months leading up to our divorce, a curious thing began to happen. Invitations he once took for granted stopped arriving. Deals that were locked in mysteriously fell through. His name started slipping off guest lists. Nothing blatant enough to scream sabotage, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in his mind. Seeds that would grow long after I was gone. The court hearing had been the public blow, but this was the private erosion. The kind that eats away at a man's sense of control until one day he looks around and realizes the world he thought he owned has quietly moved on without him. And it wouldn't stop, because I had built something he could never replace. Influence rooted not in charm, but in actual substance. I knew that in a year's time, he would look back and wonder when it all started falling apart. He'd never trace it back to me, not fully. That was the point. The best revenge isn't the kind that shouts your name. It's the kind that leaves them haunted by the possibility that you had a hand in it. And I intended to leave him wondering for the rest of his life. It was almost a year later when fate, or perhaps irony, decided to stage our reunion. I hadn't planned it. I don't run into people accidentally unless I want to. But there he was, in the lobby of a high-end hotel where I was meeting a potential partner for a private equity deal. He looked different, not ruined. He'd never allow himself to look visibly broken. But thinner, paler, with a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. The kind of tension that comes from quietly losing ground and not knowing how to stop it. He was speaking to someone I knew, though I doubt he realized it. The man was a discreet but powerful figure in the investment world, someone I'd cultivated a relationship with over years, long before my husband ever heard his name. I noticed the conversation was short, almost perfunctory, and that my acquaintance's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. A year ago, my husband would have been met with warmth and deference. Now? It was an exchange that said, "We've both moved on, and you're no longer relevant." When he saw me, there was a flicker shock, then something unreadable, almost wary. He recovered quickly, of course, with that polished charm he used to think could mask anything. "You look... well," he said, as if the words had to be dragged out. "I am," I replied, my tone deliberately measured. I didn't offer him the same hollow compliment. My eyes drifted briefly to the man he'd been speaking with, who caught my glance, gave me the faintest nod of acknowledgement, and then walked away, past my husband, toward me. We exchanged a few quiet words, business-focused, before he excused himself. That small, effortless moment spoke volumes. My world was still intact, expanding even, while his had been quietly dismantled in ways he couldn't fully see. He tried to keep the conversation light, asking about mutual acquaintances, pretending nothing had changed. But there was a stiffness in his voice, the subtle awareness that he was no longer holding the stronger position. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The most effective reminder of my victory was the contrast between us, his decline, and my unshaken momentum. When I finally excused myself, I caught the way he watched me walk away. It wasn't desire, and it wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition, the dawning realization that whatever power he thought he had over me was gone, replaced by a truth he'd never wanted to face. I had been the architect of my own fortune, and perhaps, just perhaps, the quiet architect of his undoing. And that realization, I knew, would follow him far longer than any public humiliation ever could. I didn't see him again for months after that lobby encounter, and truthfully, I didn't need to. By then, the game was already over. What remained was not about revenge, it was about legacy. Not the kind carved in stone or sung about in toasts, but the quiet, enduring truth that I had walked away on my own terms, stronger than I'd ever been, and left him standing in the ruins of a life he thought he'd built alone. People sometimes imagine victory as a loud, final moment, a gavel strike, a dramatic outburst, a mic drop. But real victory, the kind that stays with you, is quieter. It's the way your phone keeps ringing with new opportunities while theirs stays silent. It's the way your name is spoken with respect in rooms they'll never be invited into again. It's the way you can look in the mirror and see someone who was underestimated, and then proved everyone wrong without ever breaking a sweat. In the months that followed, I continued building, expanding my influence and wealth. My life didn't just move on, it evolved. I traveled to places we had once dreamed of visiting together, but now I experienced them without the weight of his ego shadowing me. I made decisions purely for myself, with no need to factor in someone else's fragile pride. As for him, word trickled back through the grapevine. Failed deals, strained friendships. That network he had once clung to now full of people who had quietly realigned themselves elsewhere. Every piece of gossip was another thread in the tapestry of my quiet triumph. And yet, I never celebrated those moments out loud. I didn't have to. The satisfaction was mine alone. Looking back, I realized the real power wasn't in taking anything from him. It was in reclaiming everything for myself. And perhaps the most poetic part of it all was knowing that the moment he laughed while signing those divorce papers, he truly believed he was winning. The silence that followed, the slow unraveling of his carefully crafted world, that was the real punchline. So, tell me, if you were in my position, would you have confronted him directly for what he did? Or would you have let the quiet, calculated dismantling speak for itself? You've been listening to Guilty Secrets Reddit. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear every detail of what you think about how this all played out.